Hi, my name is James Leach, co-founder and managing partner of Fortreum. Having been in the FedRAMP space since 2011, we've seen a lot of CSPs go through with success and many that haven't. And the goal today is to dig into why have so many CSPs been unsuccessful in terms of going through the FedRAMP authorization process, which what we're identifying is a multi-billion dollar miss from a business perspective. So we really wanted to dig into the why in terms of why have so many people had challenges and really kind of surface a couple different key themes that you can take home if you're looking at building a business case for your organization, or if you're in the middle of doing it. There's a lot of different layers to the conversation. At the end of the day, selling into US public sector cloud is an art. It takes organizational maturity. The reference architecture needs to be secure by design. And from a cultural perspective, the organization needs to be prepared to go through an audit of this caliber in terms of complexity and rigor. So let's dig into the FedRAMP business case basics. FedRAMP is law as of December 2023. So if you're a cloud service provider looking to sell into the federal government space, you must have a FedRAMP authorization. Where did the government look for that? Basically, they look in the FedRAMP marketplace. So if you go to fedramp.gov, the top right corner, you'll see marketplace, and you can go ahead and search. As of this recording, I believe there was 337 authorized systems. There's also some that are in ready state or in process. But at the end of the day, the question is, why have we seen thousands not go through it successfully? So we're going to dig into that a little bit more. As having been in the program as long as I have, there's two questions that always get asked. How long does it take and what does it cost? Well, let's jump into the timeline. You're looking at approximately 12 to 24 months. And 9 to 12 months is probably the best case scenario. I would say 12 to 18 is probably more common. And it certainly can go past 24 months. You can either go the agency route, and up until recently, it was the Joint Authorization Board, which is now the FedRAMP Board, so that space is evolving. But you're really looking for the agency as one of your first consuming buyers to potentially take you through the authorization process. The FedRAMP PMO is also looking at being a provisional authorizer as well, but that is something that, to be determined at a later date. Let's get into the cost. Most of the time when we have this conversation, from a discovery perspective, the first thing you're going to want to do is get an all-in for the investment. And from a small to mid-market perspective, cloud providers are spending 750, well above $1 million, and that's excluding staff and architecture. And enterprise large cloud service providers are spending a lot more than that. And that's if you just have one offering. The goal is, if you have a full portfolio of cloud service offerings, that there is some efficiency at scale in terms of how you prepare for it, and a limited amount in terms of the assessment, if there's a good amount of inheritance. What's the addressable market? Well, the US government is one of the largest consumers of IT spending. They spend upwards of 100 billion, and this was last year's stat via IDC. And then who are the key roles that would be involved in a decision like this? Certainly the C-suite, the board. Most of the people we're talking to are product owners, VP or director of public sector sales that sees the lack of a FedRAMP authorization as a business prohibitor. The CISO, compliance manager, director. You'll be involved in some capacity. The goal is to work together to get an understanding of what's going to be required to go through it, and from a cost standpoint, and do we have a good business case surrounding that? So what is the basic formula for a FedRAMP business case? Well, we put together this slide. It's a very simplistic slide. When you're in that discovery mode, you're looking to have calls with a 3PO advisor, a 3PO assessor, and you really want to understand, what is the total investments that's going to be required. Certainly, you're going to parlay this out over a couple of years. In this case, we picked 4 years from a revenue standpoint. What is the full cost of goods sold, your fully loaded costs, and then what's the gross margin for each deal that you have? And then eventually you get to the point where, where's the return, right? If we're going to spend as much money as we are, you need to build it in this type of format. We have literally spoken to thousands of cloud service providers. The hyperscalers themselves, we worked with them. We've also worked with the ISVs. And we've rolled up a couple different areas that are worth talking about. The cloud reference architecture, security by design, the federal mandates. What is it going to take for you to be successful? You want to avoid the showstoppers, so we're going to touch on that a little bit. The governance program is specific to the CSP in terms of your governance risk and compliance program. Is this the first time that you're going through a governance regulatory requirement, or is this something like, well, we've done 3 and this is the 4th one we're doing. We've done ISO and SOC leading up to this. That tends to be a much better profile. We're going to dig into that a little bit. And then the most underserved group that I think gets overlooked a lot is the sales organization. All of these have to work in concert together. The business pipeline needs to be there in terms of making a good, business runway for U.S. public sector business. And in many cases, it's not set up appropriately. So in this case, if you're the product manager, compliance interface, and you're looking to get this business case to the board for review of, hey, can we do this? The reference architecture is important. So typically a gap assessment would help you understand, what it's going to, how well does your architecture comply with the requirements? And if you have some follow-on from that, you're going to go ahead and dig into, if we have to make a change, what is it going to cost to retrofit that? Your internal impacts from a staffing perspective, operations, sales, governance staff, who are those individuals going to be? What will their role be? And then also the, 3PO support. Most of the time we see CSPs outsourcing the advisory, and then also the assessment and an ongoing. So when you look at this chart, the number of customers in your sales pipeline is really going to vary, right? I think most, cloud service providers know what good looks like. They may even know what a good pipeline is for their business. You may be well known to the industry where your sales multiple can be less. You may be lesser known, but you have a cutting edge product. So it's going to take more reps to get the same forecastability in terms of confidence to the business. In this case, we picked, 4 customers for year 1, year 4, 60, and our break-even point was at the end of year 2. So this has to be customized, right? This is a very basic example, but just wanted to give you an idea of when you're building the business case, this is ultimately what needs to be flowed up. Maturity of the cloud service provider in terms of cloud reference architecture. The federal mandates are typically the showstoppers that have been identified for cloud service providers not getting authorized. This can warrant a much more detailed, longer session. It can vary, on if you have a greenfield build or if you have an existing architecture and you're looking to make adjustments. This is where the variability of advisory can be very different in terms of effort. But making sure you have a comprehensive boundary, your external connections, your corporate connections and the metadata that should or should not be within that environment. Multi-factor authentication is a given. I'm going to skip down to crypto because cryptography is, one of the biggest, areas that people trip up in terms of in transit and at rest, according to FIPS 140-2, which is evolving to 140-3. That's a big deal, right? And that's, again, a good gap assessment will help you get a better handle on that. External connections. So if you're a cloud provider going for a FedRAMP moderate impact level, any of the external connections that you have, if they are not at the same impact level and FedRAMP authorized, that presents a risk to the government. So making sure that whatever you're using externally has been vetted and as an external connection that's at the same impact level is really important. Vuln management, everybody struggles with that. And again, it's not really that people don't have findings. Do you have a good vulnerability management process in place? Network, OS, web, DB, container scanning. The key is, do you have a process to identify all assets? Do you have a process to remediate all assets based off severity? 30, 90, 120 days, and then of course DNSSEC. Again, this is a much more, this is a subset of a large amount of controls that you have to go through. These are some of the bigger ones that are showstoppers. Stay tuned for more detail on that as we evolve the series. From an organizational governance perspective, do you have a dedicated compliance interface for going through FedRAMP? If you don't, you should. And most of the time, it's not just FedRAMP. There may be ISO and SOC and other regulatory requirements. We've typically seen between 6 to 11 that most cloud service providers are having to go through in a given year. So it's really important that you have somebody dedicated to the effort. And when you actually do go through it, there's priority to that effort. Because we see a lot of scenarios where FedRAMP is hot one week, a couple months down the road, ISO is more important because of this deal. You really need to look at things in terms of the 3 to 5 year view and put a lot of thought into that roadmap. That's a much better approach to going through it, and it increases your likelihood. And at the end of the day, if governance is not part of the culture, FedRAMP is one of the highest cloud security standards. It's not going to be easy to go through, and it's a major culture clash if the organization is not used to going through requirements. And then most importantly, the leadership endorsement. There's going to be a lot of regulated industries that most cloud providers are selling into. The importance is getting endorsement in terms of budget, but also priority. I need priority for this so I can continue to hit the deadlines that you're laying out. The sales organization, the most overlooked segment of failed business cases. We see a lot of different scenarios here. A simple example would be, a cloud service provider is mainly sold into commercial. They have a few federal deals opportunistically. They don't necessarily have a new federal business sales team, dedicated targets, that kind of stuff. And they try to take that as the FedRAMP business case to go through it. And in many cases, it doesn't make sense, right? There are certain cases where there's so much demand for a specific agency. Let's just say a healthcare medical device that, selling to the VA and HHS would be all the business or the focal area that they would need, and that makes business sense. But in many cases, it may not. Do you have dedicated sales resources? Do you have a VP or director of public sector sales? Do they have defined territories? The more I see that developed, the higher the likelihood is that you're going to get a potential, buyer, and also align the business case in terms of timing. Business pipeline, these are ballpark numbers. I really think you need to take a look at your business. What is your sales multiple? What multiple do you need to have predictability in the business? And mapping that back to the amount of years it'll take to get that return on investment is important. And, many cloud service providers on the commercial side, the board may or may not understand the U.S. public sector business runway. It takes a lot longer to sell deals in the government. Of course, the deals are a lot bigger. So making sure that the expectations are set well in terms of things that you can control and can't control, and knowing that the procurement cycle can be much longer than what they're used to on the commercial side. Very important points to hit home with your leadership team. From a best path forward, it's a given that if you're a cloud service provider and you know your product, you know what problems you solve, or you should have insights into regulatory trending and prohibitors. In this case, FedRAMP is a prohibitor for public sector cloud if you don't have it. Working off that $100+ billion spend, what is the addressable market for your offering? Are you so bleeding edge that you're creating the market? The customer demand through RFIs, RFQs, what are you seeing flow down from your sales team? What are you seeing from your existing customers if you have them? Who could be one of the initial agency buyers, your agency authorizer, your first mover? The goal is to have multiple potentials lined up because things happen, and sometimes that initial agency authorizer may not work out. So it's important to have some depth to that. But let's roll back all of this to the gap assessment. You're going through and evaluating people, process, and technology. You should be able to get a handle on how well your environment specs against the requirements. The thing that a 3PO won't be able to tell you is what is it going to cost for you to fix internally your architecture to meet the requirements. That's something that will The gap assessment will give you a lot of details around advisory for package development, if you're getting reference architecture help, the initial assessment and the ongoing. Getting that internal cost is important to close the loop on what it actually costs to do it. As a 3PO, it's pretty easy to give you ballparks on, the advisory side of the house and the assessment. Even though there has to be separation, we still know the ballparks. And what does it cost to maintain it? Mapping back to your strategy, what is your product baseline? You need to make sure you have a baseline. You need to make sure that you're not having major changes going on during the assessment. So what is that product baseline? If you're a big enterprise and you've got 8 offerings within your environment, how can you potentially consolidate those into an integrated offering versus having 8 standalone offerings? And then lastly, the board feedback is going to be based off the business case. The better the business case, the more likely it is that they're going to support it. And again, making sure that the timeline between sales, your reference architecture, and the governance of the organization is all aligned will package you together a much better business case moving forward. I wanted to thank you for joining this session. Go ahead and subscribe to the Fortreum channel and stay tuned for more details. Thank you.